それではお時間となりましたので、
Now it is time to start the panel discussion. This is the panel on governance system design for coexisting with AI.
はじめにパネリストの皆様をご紹介したいと
Now
思
I'd
いま
like
す。
to introduce the panelists for this
まずは
panel discussion.
大学院法学研究科准教授
Associate Professor of Graduate School of Law, Kyoto University, Professor Tatsuhiko Inatani.
続きましてパークシ
We
ャー
also have
上野山克也
CEO
様
of
です。
Berkshire Technology, Mr. Katsuya Uenoyama.
続きまして NTT コミュニケーション
And the evangelist of NTT Communications Corporation, Mr. Akira Sakaino.
続きまして森浜田松本法
We
律
also
事務所
have
パートナ
Mr.
ー
Masakazu Masujima, partner of Mori Hanada and Matsumoto.
続きまして経済産業省情報経済課弁護士
From
羽深弘樹
METI,
様です。
Deputy Director of Information Economy Division, Attorney at Law, Mr. Hiroki
そして
Habuka.
最後にモデレーターを務めていただきます
And our moderator is Mr. George Shishido, Professor of the Graduate School for Law and Politics, University of Tokyo.
ではここからの進行は宍戸教授にお
Now
願い
I'd
したい
like
と
to
思います
ask Professor Shishido to proceed.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much.
このパネル AI と共存するための
This is the panel discussion on the governance system design for coexisting with AI. When AI spreads into society and the Society 5.0, market laws and technologies are going to be drastically changed. We have our existing society where governance is needed. We need to rewrite the governance for a new society. So we are at this turning point to redesign the governance. So that's what we want us to discuss among the panel. First, I'd like to invite Mr. Habuka from METI to give us a topic for us to discuss. Thank you. My name is Habuka from Information Economy Division of METI. To realize Society 5.0, alongside the technology development, we have to develop governance as well. With poor governance, we lose the trust, meaning that we fail in social implementation. In July this year, METI issued a report. Based on that, I will be able to explain the governance model that is the prerequisite for the future society that we are building. As you can see on this slide, we depict the social changes. When we had social society 4.0, there is always people between cyberspace and physical space. People are inputting data into cyberspace. But under Society 5.0, data will be collected automatically by machine. AI will analyze data automatically, and then this will be fed back to physical space for ensuring safety of factory operation or car driving. So how can we actually achieve two targets, two goals? One is to continue with innovation, of course, with the goal to manage risk. So these are two final goals. To realize both of these goals, what type of regulations do we need? Then we face the dilemma. In other words, when we want to promote innovation, and if we deregulate, we lose the control over the risk. But if you want to control risk and actually introduce stringent, more stricter regulations, we will kill the innovation. Technology will continue to advance. It becomes very complex. So that clearly reveals the need of innovate governance itself. So governance by innovation, governance of innovation, and governance for innovation. We need to realize all of these models. And as you can see here, we actually issued a report titled Governance Innovation. This is based on the experts' discussion. So the assumption is a social change here. In the conventional governance model, we had hardware-centric society. Not much is changing. We also have fragmented data, and there is always human interference, involvement at every stage. But going forward, there will be a software-centered society where changes are ongoing. The data can be captured on a real-time basis, and it will be not just humans. Computers will be able to make decisions, and computers does not know any national borders. So this phenomena is actually cross-border changes. So that will be the social change that we are confronted with. A conventional governance model is based on national state that actually write all the rules, and companies and citizens will follow and observe those rules set by the state. This governance model is not going to work. Companies that are developing technologies and users of these technologies need to participate in the process of designing a new governance to be able to control the risk and promote innovation. For example, in the process of rules making, it is important to have diverse viewpoints, which means that, as you can see here, companies were asked, they were given instructions as to how to operate business. First, the laws has to set goals and then consider what is needed for this in the form of guidelines and standards. And guidelines and standards need to be developed based on the multi-stakeholders' participation. So companies, governance, citizens, we need to have new governance for all the players. Companies no longer simply comply with already set rules, but in the future, they have to be able to write rules as well. And the government, on the other hand, it's not going to be simply writing rules. In the future, they have to actually invite rule writers, stakeholders. The government will be a facilitator rather than the rules writer. And communities and citizens, they were the ones that were protected by the law, but their force will impact the society in a larger way. So it's not just being protected by the governance, they will be the active participants in the governance. So based on this concept, we need to consider the process of making a new governance involving all these stakeholders, such as government, companies, and communities. I'd like to refer back to this table during the panel discussion. That is all from me for now. Thank you, Mr. Hakka. Now, I'd like to ask other panelists to make presentations based on the issues presented by Mr. Habuka, starting with Mr. Sakaina. Thank you. I'm Sakaina from NTT Communications. So this is the title of my presentation. I'd like to present some of the issues that we have. I am the evangelist of NTT Communications, specifically focusing on IoT and security governance. We also make a presentation which is available on YouTube. As you know, there are multiple issues, environment, and human rights, peace, and so forth. In order to solve all of these social issues, as you know, we set SDGs. Especially, I'm personally interested in climate change. I wonder what area you are interested in. In order to realize SDGs, we believe that ICT is going to play an important role, and this role needs to be evolved. In other words, it is almost like the autonomic nerves of the body. to ensure the health of activities of individuals and companies, they have to monitor if there is any abnormality. It has to be detected to be able to avoid a danger, to be able to repair. So it's almost like immune system of the body. We believe this is the evolving cyber-physical system that provides governance for the whole globe.
This is the image for the entire value chain. You have the tracing of the source, and with IoT and with AI, there is going to be autonomous optimization that is taking place, so that between the real space and cyberspace, there's AI that carries out the evaluations and so on. And it would be best if we were able to accomplish this. But if you try to realize this, there are a lot of technical issues. There may be many different formats. It may be difficult to locate the data. Technology may be evolving too quickly, and there are no rules to share information between companies. And also points number 8 and 9, that is cybersecurity and data governance being different in each country, are very important issues to solve. So in order to protect security and compliance, there's going to be a new governance mechanism that is required. For such a system to be built with AI, the following points need to be taken into consideration. There are these the collaboration principles. For various AI systems to be able to collaborate, it's necessary to maintain compatibility, and there's the principle of transparency. For the AI results and output, it's necessary to verify this, and it must be explainable as to why a certain conclusion was reached. For example, when an AI determines that a photograph is that of a cat, it's necessary to be able to understand and explain what was the decisive factor that made it determine that a photograph was about a cat. And there's also the controllability. It's necessary for people to be able to control AI. It's not good to have the AI be able to generate its own conclusions without control. There's also the principle of safety in robots or machines connected to systems. It's necessary to protect the safety of people. There's also security, information leakage, the protection of confidentiality, and protection from cyber attacks. Privacy principles means to protect one's privacy. There's also the principles of ethics. This is very difficult to realize technically, but there's human dignity and autonomy of individuals that must be respected. And there's differences in the ethnic groups or in customs and so on, but how can this be managed? It's also necessary to look at user support principle. Depending on the needs of the users, they must be able to choose from different options. And it's necessary also to have accountability towards stakeholders. These are the points that have to be taken care of as AI systems are being built. But when it comes to building up such systems, there are operational risks that can be avoided. There's also the risk of operational mistakes. There may be illegal access, there may be destruction, there may be systems that go down, there may be misoperation. These are things that could occur. And there's also the evolution of cyber attack methodologies. And so it's necessary to have risk management that will be able to keep up with the latest trends in cyber attacks. As for operational concerns, in system management, there could be some misoperation. There could be sensors that break down. There could be systems that freeze. There may be a mistake in the operation. There may be stolen equipment. There may be a loss of compatibility so that interoperability is lost. From our experience, when system operations take place, these problems do occur. Problems do occur, so it's necessary to assume that problems of this nature are going to happen and be able to respond. The key for this is security and data sovereignty. When it comes to security, it means It's necessary to protect data and systems from illegal access and attacks. Meanwhile, data sovereignty is a new concept, but for data, it's necessary to understand who can access what kind of data when. And by law and by contracts, this must be managed. But in regard to data sovereignty, the laws and standards are not firmly in place. So it'll be necessary to look at what policies are being deployed in each region. With this as a background, last year there was a new data governance platform, Gaia X, that was announced in Europe. In regard to what this is about, in France and in Germany, the governments came up with this, and it's necessary to be able to have a platform that will be able to handle data safely. And in the area of transportation or logistics or so on, there is the various nodes, such as the computers and so on, and it's necessary to have the AI monitored through all of the areas. This is the kind of mechanism that is being envisioned. And in making a system like this, various functions are necessary. There's the management of metadata, the code, and also the authentication. What's especially important is to correspond to each of the laws of the individual countries and look at access control and also protection of privacy. In the case of Japan, when we look at security and data sovereignty to be protected, we believe that a platform has emerged to protect this. And we believe that interconnectivity can be realized with an international data collaboration platform. And I believe that something of this nature needs to be proposed. But when it comes to this kind of a platform and the image I have of such a system, for example, various types of industrial data or push data for each region, they must have a data platform to manage this, but there could also be an interface so that it can enter an international platform where common rules in regard to AI and so on can apply. And we need international rules and a system of governance. So my proposal is that it's not just paperwork that we need. We have to look at the theme of data governance from the standpoint of disaster mitigation, and perhaps we should have experiment on this and in regard to climate change. There are various types of disaster risks, and so a social risk management platform should be made to collect data and to do risk assessments. And by going through such a cycle, rules and public opinion can be formed, and it'll be possible to establish a community so that decisions can be made. And we're looking at kind of a governance system that everybody will be able to take advantage of, and so we should carry out experiments to allow this to happen. And furthermore, pushing this forward, we need to have a worldwide governance structure which is self-autonomous, and I believe that we should work together to carry out experiments. And we have a research institute, and in regard to the usage of data twins and digital twins, we have various applications for this, such as different themes such as medical health or decision making or urban energy or the future city design. And we should have experiments in the cyberspace, and then in cyber physical systems, the actual deployment could be attempted. I think these are the kind of things that we should do. As AI is being adopted quickly throughout society, we must have new systems, new methods established, and so we should all work together to establish this kind of a mechanism. Thank you very much. Mr. Sakaina, thank you very much. And next, we would now like to hear from Mr. Uenoyama. There are 2 points that I'd like to raise. First, we're looking at the characteristics of new software. When it comes to AI or IoT, there's a lot of keywords that we hear. But when we look at it technically, when we look at the traditional software as opposed to the new types of software that have emerged, we should look at the overall picture. And I'll try to explain this without using technical jargon. And then, as we see more and more of this spreading, we have to look at what points of a new governance structure needs to be looked at.
Well, I am from Paksha Technology, and this company is making various softwares. So what is happening this year in 2020? One way to explain this is this diagram. So software is sweeping the society in 4 stages, as you can see. We are somewhere between second and third stage. Early part of third stage, software itself is becoming intelligent. Meaning, specifically, what? That is what I'd like to discuss. What does that mean? So as you can see here, recognizing the environment with algorithm software, it says algorithm software is eating the world. This can be explained 3 drivers. Driver number 1 on the left is making operation by software. In 1982, software industry has grown rapidly, and part of the operation has been enhanced or replaced by software since then. The second driver is right in the middle. So that is software's moving to the cloud. We used to have software in the computer in front of us, but now software is running in the cloud, meaning information will be converged. We can do more advanced applications with enhanced efficiency. Thirdly, softwares are becoming intelligent based on algorithm. We have more advanced processing. These are new types of softwares. So what I'd like to now discuss is what do these softwares do? So we are shifting from the second and third stage. From multiple viewpoints, I'd like to explain what is happening. For one thing, the way we develop software is now completely different. The softwares that are run today, majority of them, I would say 90 or 95% of them, have been developed by humans using if-then statement. This is the deductive description of codes. The engineers are actually facing the black screen of the computer, so it's humans writing codes of these softwares. But more recently, increasingly, we use machine learning and neural networks to develop softwares, meaning, well, the overall frame will be written by humans, and the data will be fed inside the frame, and the parameters will be changed inside to complete the development of the software. If this is possible, we will be able to build software that is far more complex and more advanced. Image processing, audio processing, audio input terminals, speech, text conversion, image recognition devices. We see many of them today around us. So data and human beings collaborate to write a new software. So if this is possible, what will be changed? Software industry needs to change, adapt to this change. Conventionally, software is a critical part of the business. They had a waterfall process, which is a time-consuming process to develop software. It's a horizontal division of labor. But data creation is hard to divide. You simply have to speed up the whole process. That is the newer software. And so the question here is how we can make sure that we have outdated software and new futuristic software exist together. We have networked software, Google search engine, for example. It is a software as well. It is a complex software doing complex processing. Engineers do not understand what screen will be presented to a user. So the process is far more advanced than the human recognition. Data are fed to the machine to optimize the performance. So that's the change that is underway, which is irreversible, unavoidable. If this is to be utilized in many parts of the world, what type of governance do we need? The softwares we had before, we have input and output. There is one-to-one relations. So we had standardized way to evaluate the quality of the software. However, as we discussed the introduction of AI, there are 3 new types of softwares. When we use AI and machine learning, one is, first of all, machine learning type of software. Input and output is still one-to-one relations. We do not have to change the conventional evaluation method. But part of the processing is in the black box. So how can we deal with interpretability? And there could be a bias. When you lend money, you get the scoring, how much you can lend. Inputs include a gender difference, age, or should we enter those attributes? So that question will be asked for type 1 software. Type 2 software is a software where you have one input and you get different stochastic output. So this requires a new consideration. And type 3, this involves autonomous movement. Think of a drone or personal robot. And autonomous driving. Some of these devices do have autonomous movement in a certain space, physical space. We haven't used those devices in our daily lives. We have some robots operating in a limited space. But if we have autonomous moving robots, ubiquitously, we need to be able to deal with this software effectively, asking where the responsibility resides. And there are other issues. I'll be going these slides quickly. Once you build a software, conventionally, parameters were fixed. Those parameters were kept used. But new software has changing parameters depending on what data that is fed. For example, software that is used for a car, the software will be rewritten by the server. There may be an error in this process of rewriting the software. So to what extent should we allow that rewriting by the server? It's a new issue that we need to discuss. And lastly, this too has to do with the governance. For these new types of softwares, where are we going to apply those softwares in a society? Many of the softwares we have used were used for decision-making support. But in the future, it could be a software that makes a decision that actually carries out certain physical actions, say a medical decision or a decision in the court can be possibly made by software. What type of governance do we need in those applications? And at the same time, I talked about personal robot and mobility, where there will be autonomous movement. How are we going to design the governance? So these are the questions that I want to present to this panel. What type of software are we going to formulate in the future? We are using digital devices. We are looking at 5 to 6 hours observation of these devices. it will be a great opportunity for me to discuss with you with regard to what type of governance do we need for future softwares. The data AI drives cyber-physical systems, so it's the governance issues. Thank you very much. You presented the technical viewpoints. Now, in the remainder of time, we would like to explore legal answers to these technical questions. Now, I'd like to have two more presentations by Professor Inatani and partner Masajima. So first, Professor Inatani, please. Thank you. I'm from Kyoto University. My name is Inatani. As Justin explained, in order for us to be able to deal with environmental change, what type of laws and regulations should we formulate? I have a suggestion to make. This is my simple self-introduction. My specialty is criminal policy and legal policy, specifically designing sanctions. If AI is a cause of an accident, who is going to be responsible? We are trying to discuss how responsibility can be shared. And as Mr. Habuka introduced, governance innovation report is something that I also contributed to, the drafting of it. And as Mr. Habuka said, and Mr. Sakaina and Uenoyama said, what could be an issue for the current governance system?
Governance systems up until now had been based on the judgment of governments about how to avoid trouble. And the idea was to reduce danger situation to zero. But then, in regard to the regulated side, there's a greater gap in the information available. And there's also a fluid situation in regard to regulation. And in Society 5.0, there are difficulties. There's also AI's risks and so on that have to be taken into consideration. And so there is the new technologies emerging, and how this can be resolved needs to be looked at in terms of what is the right way of governance, but it is no longer possible to simply come up with answers to this. Consequently, in the governance report, there is now the regulation for both the private and the public sector, and it's not going to be just one-sided regulation. The regulated and the regulators are going to cooperate with each other to create better regulation and to have risk management and innovation move forward at the same time. And for those who are regulated, information can be provided to the regulators so that the regulations can be updated. And the various problems of the existing regulations can be solved through this process. But it's necessary to have the cooperation of those who will be regulated. Otherwise, it could be a problem. And so therefore, there is the issue of the sanctions that needs to be imposed. But in regard to the sanctions that we were thinking about, you can see the summary on the right-hand side. And we want to have innovation with responsibility. And we want to encourage such behavior. But there will be sanctions imposed if there is a deviation from that. And so this is the kind of system that we are looking at. And if we look at these systems, it's not seeking zero risk, but rather risk management is something that must be done rationally under the responsibility of the corporations and would be subject to examination by the regulators. And this kind of system is shown on the right-hand side. It's an obvious thing, but there are the uncertainty risks that always exist. So it's necessary to go through this cycle and seek the cooperation of corporations as there is more modification on the content of the regulations, so that the system itself will continue to evolve. And in this manner, with the evolution of the systems carried out with the positive involvement of the corporations, then it would be possible to have the regulated side make proposals in this regard. It comes to the red point here, but when it comes to the citizens' sense of values and so on, if we try to deploy technology that is negative to the sentiment of the citizens, there could be problems. And so from the stage where design and development work is being carried out, it's necessary to have a democratic process in the design so that we can have a positive contribution from the citizens from the very beginning. When it comes to logical development, it's necessary to have creativity during the process of development. In other words, it's necessary to look at what kind of values need to be realized, and from the very beginning of the development and design stage, it's necessary to take into consideration these aspects so that the quality can be enhanced. And it will require all the stakeholders to cooperate so that new value of innovation can be realized, and the government would support this. And by evolving this system, the risk, the innovation, and the system will be able to be compatible to each other. And finally, in regard to the image that we have, we are looking at something like what Otto Neurath has mentioned. We are like sailors who are on the open sea that must reconstruct their ship. This is something like Society 5.0. It may not be a perfect system that we can come up with, but for this ship, on an experimental basis, we can add fixes to that ship. This is the spirit in which we should have to fix the systems in place. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now, I would like to ask Mr. Masajima to take over. My name is Masajima, and I'd like to talk about AI and corporate governance and what are the various risks that need to be managed as we move forward. And I'd like to talk about the framework for this. And as Mr. Haruka has mentioned, we are looking into the governance for Society 5.0, and I have been involved in debate about governance and also in promotion of digital technology. I've been involved, and also I've been involved in the area of financial services because financial services involve data, and there have been various proposals that I have been participating in. And in regard to the subject of AI governance, here in Japan, there is a debate that is carried out uniquely here, and there are principles of AI that came up at a very early point. And apparently, this framework has acted as a great base for OECD activities. But in regard to the debate, there has been much meandering. But when we're talking about AI, we have to first talk about digitalization. People are talking about promoting digitalization, but at the same time, they seem to confuse the issue with AI. Consequently, when we look at governance for AI, it has become difficult to capture the picture. So in deployment of AI, I'd like to focus upon what corporations should be focusing upon. Now, when it comes to governance in AI, first of all, it's necessary to consider that technology always offers benefits, but like knives or guns or automobiles, there are always going to be negative factors. How do you control this? On a social level, how can it be controlled? And also, when they are deployed by corporations, how can this be controlled? At any rate, a degree of control is necessary, and so we need to look at the aspect of governance. Under that, AI needs to be looked at in terms of enhancing human capabilities. The same thing applies. When intelligence is being enhanced, then it's a different picture. If it's a car, you may be able to drive faster, or you may be able to do something more powerfully. But when you're dealing with intelligence, and it's not just a matter of a computer calculating things quicker, but rather we're talking about human intelligence being enhanced. So it's not just technical aspects, but also we have to look at the principles and the risks, and this is recognized in society. So in regard to this aspect, when it comes to sophisticated AI emerging, we have to look at the results that the cognition of humans will not be able to anticipate. So it's necessary to be explainable as to why something is good and why something is bad, but it's difficult for humans to do this. That's why we need governance in this area. And so as we look at governance, these are the aspects that are looked at. When it comes to a governance framework, we have to be looking at a variety of different risks. And when it comes to the method for risk management, the traditional methods were considered, and people thought about how this could be applied. But when it involves ethical matters, then a technical management would not be sufficient. It's necessary to look at corporate values, and management is necessary covering those elements. That's one of the characteristics of AI governance. Another aspect, even if we talk about AI, we are handling data if we're asked what it's about. So we have to look at the framework for data management, and we have to build up AI governance with that in mind.
So by design, risk-based approach would be required. So information protection law, the personal information protection law, has accountability as a basis to be able to explain. And this is how we'll be able to win the trust of people. So that's the concept. So why do we need governance? The ultimate goal is to gain trust of people involved. So there are many types of AIs. In what application are we going to use? We need to make decisions case by case using data. We will train AI. It is usually much better if we are able to introduce it at early stage. But on the other hand, there are challenges, issues the AI might cause. In Japan, we tend to focus on the risk. So many companies are reluctant in introducing AI. The companies, and especially management, they are bound by the medium-term management plan. They cannot be flexibly change that plan. So that inhibits the adoption of AI. The government as well, digital governance code and DX rating, they are using them as policies to try to promote DX. And of course, DX includes AI as part of that. So we are trying to introduce AI. In the interest of time, I won't be able to give you the details, but there are 4 steps to build AI governance. First of all, we need to establish internal control system similar to the conventional risk management. What is important, though, as I mentioned earlier, is the ethical aspect. So we need to really reflect the corporate value, meaning that the top management need to be deeply involved in this process of making internal control. What does AI enable? What can we do with AI? What impact is it going to bring about to society? In order to answer these questions, management need to understand AI. They need to study about AI. So that's one thing. Another characteristic is in risk management. to what extent people are involved. There must be a certain decision in terms of AI implementation. We have the principle of human-centric approaches. Especially for mission-critical systems, we have to make sure there will be heavy human involvement. If it is not, the humans simply have to monitor AI. So there are different levels of human involvement. The third step is the way of operation. When AI is developed, how do you develop AI? How can you get rid of bias? How can you prepare data set? There are multiple questions. So it's basically the question of how. Lastly, which is important, is a communication with stakeholders. What we are trying to do is eventually winning the trust of the stakeholders. To do so, we have to have good communication strategy. It's not just one-way communication, it is the interactive communication that is needed. So we have to have interactive communication system. How is it going to evolve is a good question for us to discuss here. Thank you very much. So those are legal perspectives on the issues and how to solve them. We have Professor Inatani and Mr. Masajima making presentations. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Sakaina to give us a comment on other presentations. We talked about the ethical aspect. I'm pretty sure all the panelists here are well educated. They have good sense of ethics. But AI would help even children to develop softwares. If that causes an accident or some trouble, who will be rendered responsible? The incident or accident caused by a child, who will be responsible for that accident? Mr. Uenoyama, listening to other presentations, I think the assumption is this. We need to redesign governance for digital era, and it's the government officials who are claiming the need of redesigning governance, which is great. And secondly, in order for the joint responsibility, drastic change may be necessary. If I am asked to present my suggestion, what I could say is, well, when we were discussing Society 5.0, there is the government on one hand, and there are citizens and the companies. In between these players, we need communication. How do we go about this communication? This is where digital technologies can play an important role. Online ballot or voting is one way. When you look at all the words that are submitted online, you will understand what is needed. So that will be an interesting application area. Thank you very much. So those comments we just heard remind me of the inclusiveness, saying that we should not leave anybody behind. Nobody is left behind. So how can we proceed with governance by innovation without leaving anybody behind? So government officials are saying all this, which is good, but in the beginning, Mr. Habuka mentioned that need, and also like to invite all the other panelists to make some comments on this. As the Professor Shishido talked about the inclusive, I think it's going to be even more important going forward. We have very complex systems. Users, of course, developers cannot even explain what's happening inside the system. So with that in mind, eventually, would that be the company that will be responsible, or is it individuals? It's not just the choice between these two. As I mentioned earlier, we have to have multi-stakeholder approach to solve this issue. So rules or goals will be set by the government, and systems will be designed by companies. And then users, if there is any problem, should be able to communicate the problem. So the whole society and their mindset need to be changed. Thank you very much. What Mr. Habuka said has to do with the presentation by Professor Inatani. What do you have to say on that? Yes, exactly. Mr. Sakaina mentioned an accident caused by a child that is an interesting case. I think there are multiple approaches, as Mr. Habuka said. It's not trying to find who is responsible. So the trouble is caused by a child. To what extent should we analyze who are the stakeholders? Have we involved children in designing the safety of the device? If the trouble is unimaginable and predicted, we cannot actually find a child responsible. And then when the product can be developed together, we have a process, ongoing process to improve the product. By having this design system designed, we'll be able to change society one by one steadily, and we'll be able to have better, smooth communications. And I think which is an important procedure that we need to take. So what comes to mind is an analogy of a car. The history of problem solving. That we give licenses to people, the drivers, and we actually limit the age of drivers. Maybe we can apply the same analogy to the use of AI. Should we permit or should we regulate? The AI regulation, I think, can be explained by Mr. Uenoyama.
It depends on how technology is used by people, and also the matter of how software and AI should be created. It should be linked to the subject of inclusiveness. As digital evolves, there seems to be a question about what is happening with the senior citizens. We're looking at the keyword of community. And as digital technology evolves, it's supposed to enhance communication. But as of 2020, now it's a phase where young people are creating various new things. But as digital technology spreads, we need to look at intergenerational collaboration. And we need to have more digitalists among senior citizens. And this could have a greater impact on society, so there needs to be more debate about this. Thank you very much. When we look at governance by innovation, we need to look at various stakeholders, such as consumers or senior citizens. And this was mentioned, so I would appreciate comments in that regard. Well, when it comes to the senior citizens, this is being dealt with in the financial services industry as people have declining mental capabilities. Then the speed of learning is not as fast as young people. Then there's a question of how the elderly can keep up. But in this regard, basically, if it's a matter of perception, we need to look at how AI can be involved. I think that by seriously thinking about this, through AI, there are aspects that can be augmented. And if we look at the community of senior citizens, we can look at them on an individual basis and see what kind of augmentation is being carried out. Personalization can be applied to look at how digital technology is benefiting the aspect of inclusion. And I think that that's something that corporations can think about. Thank you. I'd like to discuss more But we're running out of time, so just one final thing that I'd like to ask everybody here is in regard to governance by innovation. In order to move forward, there are things which each entity must do, but what do you think must be done, first of all, for people who are participating in this symposium? Please give us your comments on this. And I'd like to ask, first of all, Professor Inatani. Generally speaking, I think that a new governance system is necessary, and we need to have the courage to experiment and change. And we have to learn from mistakes, because mistakes are unavoidable. Otherwise, it'll be difficult to have systems evolve. Up until now, it applies to me as well, but when academics debated about what to do, we try to avoid making a mistake. But perhaps we should have a broader perspective and be able to change with more flexibility. Thank you. Mr. Masajima. Thank you. In this regard, the importance of people who are referred to as leaders should be emphasized. People who are the leaders, especially in the case of corporate leaders that I'm thinking about, they need to have a long-term perspective and look at 10 years ahead and what we must strive to achieve. Instead of looking at just the recent stock prices or how to achieve praise for oneself, it's necessary to have more of a sense of mission. And most likely there's going to be a lot of volatility up ahead, but it's necessary to, with a very strong will, to move forward. Thank you. Mr. Uenoyama? Yes, there's a lot of things that needs to be commented, but when it comes to large corporations, they're in a strong position. Consequently, I hope that the industry should take action. I've talked about intergenerational collaboration, but every corporation has people of different ages, so there should be intergenerational collaboration carried out internally within corporations so that we can accelerate what is taking place in society. I think that would be interesting. Thank you. Then, Mr. Sakaino. In my case, we should try things because we don't know what's going to happen next. We may not be able to anticipate, but when it comes to self-driving vehicles and robots, if they are not trained properly, like pets, they will have to be taken care of if they do not behave themselves. And so therefore we have to look at what could happen with AI, and experiments in society should be carried out. Instead of doing the experiments in physical space that may cause accidents, within cyberspace, we should create models like digital twins of the actual society and try to anticipate what is going to take place. We should do experiments, and we should try to look at what kind of issues could emerge. And on an open basis, a wide variety of different people should debate and try to solve problems. There should be trials, experiments that are carried out. I hope the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry could look at such social experiments to be carried out. Thank you very much. For intergenerational collaboration, or the corporations or the academia, as a coordinator of all of this, what is the role that the government can play? I would like to ask Mr. Habuka. Thank you very much. Listening to the discussions today, the point of the new technologies is that we don't really understand what could conceivably happen. But if that's the case, since we don't know what could happen, we should abandon efforts. But then in Society 5.0, we assume that things may not be anticipated, but we should try new things. And in Japan, there's the tendency to try to avoid making a mistake, but we have to think about how to reach society 5.0. And there are many cases where we can't understand the technology, so we may be tempted to forbid a technology. And because we can't anticipate what will take place, many corporate people cannot move forward with new innovation, or in communities, they can't anticipate what will take place. And so therefore, there may be criticism if there are mistakes made. And so therefore, as we face society 5.0, it would be a contradiction to try and avoid making mistakes. We should assume that mistakes will occur, but we should have small experiments and try to anticipate what could happen when it is implemented. And so therefore, we should try to look at improvement and construction and constructive debate. And I hope that people can positively participate. The role of the government is to provide the place for such debate to take place, and it should not be on a incentivized basis. I believe that it's going to be very important. And we have to look at a multi-stakeholder approach, and we have to understand each other. We cannot just simply listen to others. It's necessary to look not at lifelong employment, but we must look at an evolving door between the private and public sectors. And I'm involved in that revolving door process. But the society as a whole must carry out exchange of human resources and carry out interaction. That is important. Thank you very much. In order to push forward innovation, a new governance model is necessary, but it's a model that must continue to learn, and to participate in the process is very important. I hope that people who participated in this panel will now have a better understanding of the issues that exist. I've gone beyond my allocated time, but with that, I would like to close off this session. Thank you very much. I would like to thank Professor 稲谷, Mr. Uenoyama, Mr. Sakaino, Mr. Masajima, and Mr. Habuka, as well as Professor Shishido. Thank you very much for your participation here today.